We've got a couple of Triple H questions to start in honor of his 25 years with WWE. First, let's go to Quiche.
Hey, Solid Monster, Keish here. I just finished watching the final segment on SmackDown this week for Triple H's anniversary, and it kind of put in perspective of just how much over the years I gained much more appreciation for him. Over the years, since he scaled back the in-ring stuff, and you've seen much more the behind the scenes of his personality and just who he is as a person, as well as his work in NXT, my appreciation level for him has changed dramatically. Can you just speak to that? Just how people's perspective of Triple H has changed over the years since his work with NXT, as well as even your own personal viewpoint of him might have changed over the last several years.
My perspective on Triple H, I wouldn't say that it's really changed much over the years. I always had respect looking back at his career, the career that he built for himself, and I think that he is sometimes unfairly kind of maligned as, oh, well, if he didn't marry Stephanie, then he wouldn't have become the big star that he went on to become. He wouldn't be in the position he's in. Yes, that's true. But I think he still would have gone on to win multiple championships and be a big star and be in the Hall of Fame and probably would have ended up being an agent or something or a trainer or a coach like they do with some of these other guys because wrestling is all that he's ever known. I didn't see Triple H going on to be a big Hollywood star the way that Rock did or somebody like that. So I think it's unfair to suggest that he would not have gone on to become a big star. But obviously he benefited from being part of the family. He gets to, he would get to sit in on meetings and things of that nature. I didn't think much of the stories that multiple people would tell, writers and talent and such, over the years of how very protective, overly protective of his spot he could be, and how he didn't necessarily treat everybody well at all times. And he would, in certain meetings, he would talk down on some people. There's the famous Jerry Briscoe story I've told before, the stuff with Kurt Angle. Oh, he's too small to be the champion. Oh, really? Well, why don't you take him in a real fight and see how small he really is? And then, Triple H backed down. You hear stories like that, and it makes you wonder, when he was in that position, how many other people did he affect? Their careers, their push or lack thereof or whatever, because he was sitting in these meetings at a time when he himself was a talent, and it makes you wonder what kind of impact, a negative impact, he may have had on other people's careers when he was on top and wanted to do everything in his power to protect that spot. Not unlike other top guys over the years who wanted to protect their spot, but he was in a unique position of power, right? That even guys like Rock and Austin and Jericho and Kane and people like that, they weren't sitting in Foley. They weren't sitting in on production meetings. They weren't having the kind of influence that he was having at that time. So there was a part of Triple H's career where, there was probably a lot of that going on, and the whole reign of terror, I was not a fan of it. I never saw Triple H as being the guy. I've said this before, and it's a comment that Jim Cornette has made, I believe, in the past, and I agree with him 100%. Triple H was never the guy. He was the guy who worked with the guy. And that's not a bad spot to be in. But as the years went on, and all of these other names went away, or they retired, Triple H became the guy, and they wanted you to think, he's the game. He's the king of kings. Bow down when he walks out. And he was kind of made out to be bigger than he really was. But that's the benefit of being in the position that he's in. You get to write history. You get to write history or rewrite history. And I think he probably will go down as being, a bigger name in the ring, like a bigger name than he really was. I think there's going to be people years from now, young fans, who look back and look at Triple H the way that some of us look at a Stone Cold, or look at Hulk Hogan, or look at The Rock. There are going to be people who believe that. There are going to be people who feel that way. And he never did the kind of business that those people did. He was never as big of a star. If you ask people, who's your Mount Rushmore of wrestling people, wrestling names, WWE, even just limiting it to WWE, I don't think you're going to get a lot of people that put Triple H on the side of that Mount Rushmore. Some people will, but you're not going to see his name. You're going to see a lot of the same names. San Martino, Hogan, maybe Cena. People would put Cena on that list. Rock, or Shawn Michaels or an Undertaker or even a Bret Hart or somebody like that. But you're not going to hear Triple H's name mentioned necessarily. So he has benefited from that over the years. The stuff with NXT, I think it was something that had to be done. WWE went through a period there in the late 2000s into the early 2010s where they really were not as focused as they should have been on developmental. And I think you had this period of, it was almost like a drought. It was a drought of new great talent because they had neglected or some of the policies, for a while there were only recruiting people who were above 6'2", 200 and whatever it was, 240 or 250. And thankfully I don't think that policy lasted too long. There are people who would disagree and say, oh, that's the problem with wrestling. We have too many small guys. I think if you have too many of anything, that's a bad thing. You don't want to have too many small guys. You don't want to have too many big guys. I think a little bit of variety is a good thing. We have more of a variety now than we did 10 years ago or 12 years ago. And Triple H is the one who took over the developmental system basically and gave us NXT, but they started to take it more seriously. That's a good thing. That he took the reins on that and did what he did is a good thing. I think there's parts of it that weren't so good when it comes to some of the independent promotions out there, and now they're trying to expand into other countries. Thankfully, it sounds like NXT Japan is dead in light of everything going on. They were kind of getting close to that, and now it doesn't look like that's going to happen, which I think for Japan is probably a very good thing. I'm not a big fan of them necessarily, trying to muscle into all these different places. I'm not saying you can't plant your flag here and there and you want to recruit talent from all over the world, but I don't look at that as being a very positive thing at all for the independent scene. I don't look at that as being a very positive thing at all for some of these big promotions that are specific to these countries. When WWE comes in, it's kind of like the beginning of the end for a lot of these people. So I think there's an agenda there, but I do think in terms of WWE, what he has done with the NXT system has been a huge positive for the company. And turning NXT into a full-fledged brand, some of the names that have since come out of NXT, the NXT TakeOver shows being some of the best quality shows that WWE puts on in a given year after year. I think NXT is probably suffering even more than the WWE main roster is from having these empty building events, because that's what NXT TakeOver was built on. It was built on crowd reaction. It was built on putting matches out there where you have the visual and the audio of those people going crazy and chanting NXT and losing their minds. NXT has been impacted, I would argue, maybe even worse than the main roster has by the lack of crowds on these shows. So right now, NXT, I think, is kind of suffering a little bit for it. But I think the work that he has done on the whole with NXT, as far as what it's done for WWE, has been a huge positive since he took over. And that will now be part of his legacy. He is the father, the proud papa for NXT and for the Performance Center. What would they do without this Performance Center in terms of running shows if they didn't have the PC? Boy, they'd be in a lot of trouble, wouldn't they? That doesn't happen if Triple H doesn't kind of spearhead that effort and take over and say, hey, we need a place to call home. So there have been a lot of positive things, I think, behind the scenes that he's done, but I don't think you can ignore the stories of some of the not so nice things that he's done behind the scenes back when he was still a talent. And it does make me wonder that, how many people maybe had their careers negatively impacted by that? By a guy who was just full of power at the time and had a lot of influence and really didn't seem overly interested in anybody beyond himself and his own inner circle. He handpicked Randy Orton, he handpicked Batista for Revolution. They were taken care of, but what about everybody else? For a while there, it was the Triple H show, and that did, I think, damage to the brand. That did damage to the Raw brand because they pushed him so hard and so much that it negatively affected the quality of the shows. So I don't think that can be ignored. On the whole, though, I think his contributions have probably been a net positive for the company. I'd like to think he's a different person. I mean, now he's not in the ring full time. I would hope he's a different person now. in terms of all those stories that, we would hear. But, I think he's doing a lot of positive things for the company. I think there's reason to be hopeful when Vince McMahon does step aside, or when Vince just isn't in power anymore. It's probably going to be the Triple H and Stephanie show. There could be a lot of drawbacks to that, but I don't know. I look at Triple H and I see somebody who's a fan, who probably has a lot, who probably shares a lot of the same kind of desires that I think real wrestling fans would like to see on these shows. And once he gets into power, once he ascends to that throne, he's not going to be able to just snap his fingers like Thanos and make all the bad stuff go away. But I think we might see improvements in the product. We might just see improvements in the product. So I think there's a reason to be optimistic, and that will now be his legacy going forward, I think, more than even his wrestling career. When he goes into the Hall of Fame one day as a solo, not as part of DX or anything, I think that his outside the ring career, his post in ring career, is going to be as big of a thing as his wrestling career, because this is the guy who may take over for Vince McMahon. It's not a spot that I don't know that I would necessarily want to be in that spot. There's a lot of pressure involved. He'll have big shoes to fill for all the good things that Vince has done over the years. Forget all the the creative mess in recent years. That's going to be a big spot. So time will tell if that's going to be a good thing or a bad thing. I am trying to be optimistic about this, and I'd like to look at that and go, when Triple H gets in power, things are going to improve. Things are going to be better. I don't have anything to prove that other than just me being overly optimistic and hopeful, and only time will tell if that will be the case or not. Jay Vaughn from the Bronx, with WWE celebrating 25 years of the game, what are your top 5 favorite Triple H matches of all time? My favorite Triple H matches were matches that Triple H was a part of, and this is in no particular order, but I mean, the 5 were easy. I scribbled the 5 down very quickly, and then I took a few minutes, and I figured I could probably get a top 10 out of it. So this is in no particular order. The street fight with Cactus Jack, Royal Rumble 2000. Not only was it a great match, or a great brawl, whatever you want to describe it as, it was such an important match in the career of Triple H. Mick Foley, I mean, in that and the Hell in a Cell match the next month, he lost both those matches. He did everything he possibly could to get this guy over as a believable main eventer. And I've said before, I didn't take Triple H seriously as a real headliner or main eventer or champion until I saw the street fight at the Rumble in 2000 with Cactus Jack, and that made me a believer. And it was just a great night for him, and it was a great match, and one of the most important matches of his career. So that's on my list. The 10-man tag on Raw in Dallas, February of 2000. Triple H teamed with the Radicals against The Rock, Cactus Jack, Rikishi, and Too Cool. I just love that match. One of my favorite matches in Raw history. That crowd was just so electric. Everybody, even the guys in the match, they were all firing on all cylinders. The Radicals had just come in. Even the post-match stuff where the lights went out, they came back on. A very slimmed down looking Paul Bearer walks out. Big pyro. Out comes Kane, looking as badass as he's ever been. Everything about the end of that show and the final segment that night was just fantastic. And he was part of that match. Triple H was part of that. In fact, I think he got the pin. I think he may have gotten the pin in that match. Well, actually, maybe not. Now that I think about it, I think he hit the pedigree, but it might have been Benoit. I think Benoit got the win, which is why we'll never see it again. The Iron Man match with The Rock at Judgment Day 2000. I loved that match. I thought it was one of the best Iron Man matches, maybe the best in company history. Some people will say Bret and Shawn. I also like the John Cena, Randy Orton Iron Man match. I wouldn't call it the best, but there are a few that stick out to me that I liked that I know some people didn't. The Rock Triple H one, it ended, I think, 6 falls to 5. It was the complete opposite of Shawn and Bret in that went to 1 fall. They went the full 60 minutes without a single fall. This match went, it ended up 11 different falls, I think, in the match. There was interference there towards the end, but it worked. It was kind of overbooked there at the end, but it worked. It was electric. It was exciting. The debut of the American Badass coming out, cleaning house. Everything about that. People were losing their minds. It was so much fun to watch that match. That's on my list. Last Man Standing. A few months later. Last Man Standing. Fully Loaded 2000. Triple H against Chris Jericho. Best match the two of them ever had. They had great chemistry together. Chris Jericho posted his own little 25th anniversary salute on social media the other day to Triple H. And he said we had great chemistry together. That was the best match I ever saw the two of them have against each other. They had that fun match on Raw where everyone thought Jericho won the title and then it got reversed. But the Last Man Standing match of Fully Loaded was the match of the night. It was fantastic. It was a great match. It's a great match between those two. The tag team match on Raw in May of 2001 for the tag team titles. Stone Cold and Triple H defending against Chris Jericho and Chris Benoit. Another match that will never be celebrated on television. It will never be shown. It's too bad because it is one of the greatest matches, one of the greatest television matches in the history of that company. It was a great match. That was the night Triple H tore his quad. He soldiered on for a few more minutes. I don't know how he did it, but he did. And it was just a great piece of business. So I think that's 5, right? Those would be my 5. In no particular order. Those, to me, are my favorite and the 5 best Triple H matches of his career. The year 2000 kicked all kinds of ass, match-wise. WWE had some amazing pay-per-view shows that year. WrestleMania was not one of them. King of the Ring was not one of them. But almost everything else was off the charts awesome. And Triple H was a big part of that. He really was. He and Rock both, but Triple H was a very big part of that. I still say 2000 was Triple H's best year. 2001 had the chance to rival that if he didn't get hurt in May. He had that classic 3 Stages of Hell match against Steve Austin at No Way Out. He had, what I thought was a really fun match. I loved the match he and Undertaker had at WrestleMania 17. There were no titles on the line, but I thought they had a very fun match, an excellent match. He was on his way to another great year before he got hurt. You want to make it a top 10? I would include the 3 Stages of Hell. I would include the ladder match against The Rock at SummerSlam back in 98. The comeback match with Shawn Michaels at SummerSlam in 2002. And the, probably the Mania triple threat. I was having second thoughts on that. But yeah, no, I would include the Mania triple threat, WrestleMania 20, with Shawn Michaels and Chris Benoit. And maybe the end of an era match, Hell in a Cell, with The Undertaker at WrestleMania 28. Same as the top half, no specific order for the bottom half either. But if I opened it up to a top 10, those probably would be the 5 additional matches I would put in there. So yeah, he's been part of some great matches over the years, some outstanding matches, not always just because of who he was in the ring with. You have that many great matches, at some point you got to admit, hey, this guy's pretty good. So those would be my top 10 for Triple H.